A mistake that would change everything. Miranda Scott had been a flight attendant for over 5 years, well past the initial challenges of adjusting to the routine of her job. The long hours, the endless list of passenger requests, and the anxiety of making sure every detail was attended to had become second nature. Each day, as she stepped onto the plane, she knew exactly what to expect. But today was different. It had started like any other flight. The passengers had boarded the plane without incident. The seatbelt sign was on, and Miranda was moving down the aisle, offering drinks to passengers. The plane was nearly full, and as usual, a few passengers had already made the kind of small talk that always seemed to go along with air travel. She had seen her share of people in all walks of life, from the casual traveler to the jet-setting elite, but none had ever caught her attention quite like this particular passenger. The woman in question, Maya Carter, was different. She had the look of someone who belonged in a boardroom, not on a flight. Dressed in a sharply cut suit that screamed professionalism and wealth, Maya made her way through the aisle with the kind of grace that suggested she was used to attention. Miranda had seen businesswomen in first class before, but there was something about Maya that made her stand out, something Miranda couldn't quite place. The woman carried herself with an air of quiet power, as though she was in complete control of her world. At first, Miranda didn't think much of it. After all, people boarded flights all the time, each with their own stories. But when Miranda passed by Maya's seat and caught the woman's gaze, there was something in those eyes that stopped her cold. It wasn't just confidence, it was authority, the kind of authority that made Miranda, however briefly, feel as if she wasn't quite in control of her own space. It was unsettling, but Miranda dismissed it quickly. She had a job to do. The flight was routine at first. Miranda went about her duties, ensuring passengers were comfortable, offering drinks and snacks, and attending to the usual in-flight needs. She had done this countless times before, but today there was an inexplicable tension in the air. It wasn't anything Maya did. It was something about the way she carried herself, something that made Miranda feel as if she had just brushed against something dangerous. Miranda wasn't the type to let her imagination get the best of her, but something about Maya felt different. As the plane took off and climbed into the skies, the mood in the cabin shifted. There was the usual noise of passengers settling in, some flicking through the in-flight entertainment options, others whispering softly to each other. Miranda made her rounds, offering drinks and checking on passengers. But each time she passed Maya's seat, she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was watching her. Not just observing, but watching closely, as if she were waiting for something to happen. After offering drinks, Miranda caught Maya's eye again. The woman had a calm demeanor, but there was a sharpness in her gaze that made Miranda pause for a moment. Something in her gut told her to be cautious, but Miranda had no reason to think anything was wrong. She glanced at Maya's boarding pass. First class, just like any other elite traveler. Yet, her intuition was still buzzing. Miranda moved to the next task, shaking off the discomfort that had started to creep into her chest. She was being paranoid, she told herself. There was no reason to feel like something was wrong. But still, she kept sneaking glances at Maya, unable to completely ignore the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. When it was time to offer snacks and drinks again, Miranda found herself walking down the aisle, her focus once more on Maya. This time, something in her behavior seemed different. Maya was seated with perfect posture, but now she was holding a small notebook, making quick notes, her eyes never leaving the page. Miranda couldn't help but wonder what someone so seemingly composed could be writing about, especially when she had barely made a fuss about being moved to the back of the plane. Miranda's training and years of experience as a flight attendant had taught her how to read the subtleties of a passenger's behavior, who would be easygoing, who might make trouble. But Maya wasn't like anyone Miranda had ever dealt with. She didn't seem angry. She wasn't demanding anything. But there was something unsettling about how effortlessly she had adjusted to being moved, as if the inconvenience of the seat change didn't affect her in the least. And then, without warning, Miranda did something that would alter the course of both their lives. It began as a small gesture, something Miranda had done countless times before. A simple seat reassignment. One of the first-class passengers had complained about a misbooked seat, and it seemed easier to just move the woman to the back of the plane to avoid any further disruption. Miranda hadn't thought much of it. After all, there were plenty of seats available in the main cabin. However, this was no ordinary passenger. As Miranda approached Maya's seat with the intent to move her, she couldn't help but feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as though she were crossing an invisible line. Maya didn't resist. In fact, she didn't even seem surprised. But when Miranda asked her to move to the back of the plane, a brief flicker of something passed through Maya's eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was something far deeper, calm acceptance, but with a hint of something Miranda couldn't understand. And that, in itself, made Miranda's skin crawl. "Excuse me, miss. I'm going to need you to move," Miranda said, her voice even but strained, as she motioned to the back of the plane. Maya had looked up from her notebook, unbothered. Without a word, she stood, grabbed her bag, and followed Miranda to the back of the plane, moving as though the whole situation were nothing more than a slight inconvenience. Miranda, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a seat reassignment. There was something in Maya's behavior that felt almost too controlled, too perfect. She felt as though she had already anticipated this interaction, long before Miranda had even considered making the move. The whole situation felt wrong, yet Miranda continued her work, telling herself it was just a coincidence. However, little did Miranda know, this one simple mistake would be the start of a chain of events that would leave her career hanging by a thread. And soon, it would become clear that Maya Carter was no ordinary passenger. As the plane cruised into the sky, Miranda had no idea how far-reaching the consequences of this single mistake would be. And in just a matter of hours, the airline would never be the same again. Miranda's focus was broken again when she looked toward the back of the plane, expecting to see Maya fuming or demanding an explanation. But what she saw instead was the same calm, composed demeanor, the same confidence that had unsettled her from the very beginning. And in that moment, Miranda realized she had made a mistake that would cost her everything. The consequences unfold. As the airplane leveled out, gliding smoothly at 30,000 feet, Miranda found herself grappling with a quiet tension that seemed to cling to the air around her. She couldn't focus fully on her duties, the lingering weight of the earlier decision pressing down on her shoulders. Moving Maya Carter to the back of the plane had seemed like a small act of the time, a routine adjustment, one she had done hundreds of times without a second thought. But now, as she moved up and down the aisle, passing by Maya's new seat at the back, Miranda couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary mistake. She had misjudged something, someone, and she couldn't quite place her finger on what that was. But as she continued to glance over at Maya, her gut instinct screamed that this situation was far from over. Maya, seated at the rear of the plane, appeared unperturbed by the sudden change. She didn't speak, didn't cause a scene, and didn't even look up when Miranda made her rounds later to check on the passengers. In fact, Maya looked completely at ease, as if the whole situation were beneath her concern. She had resumed her earlier position, calm and composed, writing something in her notebook as if there was no disturbance at all. Her mannerisms were unsettling, too composed for someone who had just been moved from first class to an economy seat without explanation. Miranda's nerves twisted tighter with every passing minute. She had tried to shake the feeling, tried to convince herself that she was simply being paranoid. After all, she had done this job long enough to know that most passengers were forgiving when it came to small inconveniences. But something about Maya, about the way she had accepted the situation, didn't sit right. There was a quiet power behind her demeanor, a force Miranda couldn't fully understand but could feel. As the flight continued, Miranda's unease only grew. She found herself stealing glances at Maya, who never once raised her voice or looked in Miranda's direction. It was as if Maya were silently biding her time, waiting for something. But Miranda couldn't put her finger on what that something might be. There was a knot in Miranda's stomach every time she looked at her, something primal, an instinct telling her that Maya was much more than she appeared. The hours passed, and Miranda went through the motions of the flight, serving drinks, checking seatbelts, and delivering snacks, but her thoughts were never far from Maya. She couldn't stop questioning what had just happened. Why had Maya been so calm? Why had she never once made a scene or demanded to speak to the captain or the supervisor? This wasn't normal. If anyone had been unjustly moved from their seat, especially someone in first class, they would have caused a ruckus. They would have wanted answers, explanations, apologies. But Maya, nothing. It was as though she had expected this. It was as if she had known this would happen. It was this thought, this unsettling realization, that made Miranda's heart skip a beat. She had assumed Maya was just a high-powered businesswoman, a regular passenger with a first-class ticket. But what if she was more than that? What if Maya had been playing some kind of game? A game Miranda hadn't even known she was part of. As the plane began its descent, Miranda's thoughts spiraled. She was still haunted by the nagging feeling that she had made a critical error, but she had no idea just how serious that error would turn out to be. When the plane touched down, and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began unbuckling and gathering their things. Miranda moved through the aisle, thanking passengers and wishing them a pleasant day. But her mind was miles away. She couldn't stop thinking about Maya and what had just happened. She had moved someone who might not be just another traveler. When Miranda reached the front of the plane, her heart stopped as she saw the captain standing at the galley, waiting for her with an unreadable expression. He motioned for her to come closer, and as she approached, she could see the subtle tension in his posture. "Miranda," he said, his voice firm, but not harsh, "we need to talk." Miranda's heart began to pound. She had dealt with a few complaints before, nothing unusual, but the captain's demeanor was different today. It was almost as though he knew something she didn't. "What's going on?" Miranda asked, her voice betraying the anxiety that had begun to settle in her chest. "We've received a complaint," the captain began, "about the seating arrangement for a passenger on this flight. Maya Carter, to be specific." Miranda's blood ran cold at the mention of the name. Maya Carter, the same woman she had moved to the back of the plane. The captain continued, "It states that she was treated unfairly, moved to an economy seat despite her first-class reservation. We need to address this situation, and we need to do it now." Miranda's mind raced. A complaint. She hadn't even thought about the consequences. She had simply assumed it was a small error, an innocent mistake. But now, standing in front of the captain, the full gravity of what had just happened was becoming clear. Maya wasn't just some business traveler. She had connections that Miranda hadn't understood. She had no idea that one small decision would result in this kind of fallout. I thought there was an issue with her booking," Miranda stammered, her voice shaky, but the captain's glare told her that explanation wasn't going to cut it. "This is serious, Miranda," the captain said, his tone lowering with intensity. "You can't just move passengers around without a valid reason. She's a first-class passenger with a confirmed ticket, and what you did has caused a lot of problems for the airline." Miranda felt her stomach churn. She had been so sure of her decision at the time, but now she realized just how wrong she had been. How could she have been so careless? How had she not questioned Maya's calmness, her lack of resistance? The captain's expression softened slightly, but it was still stern. "You need to go to the front desk and report this. I'll make sure the right people are informed, but for now, we'll handle it as quietly as possible. You may want to prepare for what's coming." As the plane docked at the gate and passengers began disembarking, Miranda felt like she was walking through a fog. She couldn't hear the noise of the terminal, couldn't focus on anything except the storm that was brewing around her. Maya's calmness, her ease with being moved, was no longer something Miranda could dismiss. It was something far bigger. When Miranda reached the front desk, She was met by the senior flight attendants who looked at her with a mix of concern and judgment. They didn't say anything immediately, but the silence in the air was deafening. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. By the time she was asked to meet with airport security officers, Miranda realized that her mistake was much more significant than she had ever anticipated. This wasn't just about one incident on a flight. This was about a bigger picture, one she was only beginning to understand. As the officers led her to a sterile room in the back of the terminal, Miranda felt the full weight of the situation pressing down on her. She wasn't sure if she could fix this. How could she? What had she done? And then it happened. A man in a dark suit, his expression cold and professional, entered the room. He didn't look at her, but it didn't matter. He knew exactly who she was. He knew exactly why she was here. "Miranda Scott," he said, his voice detached, "you're being investigated for an incident on Flight 217 today. A complaint has been filed by a passenger, Maya Carter. This matter has been escalated." The words hit Miranda like a punch to the gut. Maya Carter. Her mind raced, and as the man continued speaking, Miranda realized that this wasn't just about a seating error. This was about a powerful woman who had the kind of influence Miranda couldn't even comprehend. And she had just made the mistake of her life by underestimating her. "Miss Carter is a key stakeholder in this airport," the man continued, his tone unwavering. "She has already contacted the board. We need your full cooperation." Miranda's head was spinning. The room around her felt like it was closing in, and the cold metal chair beneath her did nothing to ease the pressure building in her chest. The phone call that had just started ringing in her mind didn't belong to anyone she knew. It was just the echo of consequences, far bigger than anything she had anticipated. She sat in that room, her thoughts a chaotic swirl. How could she have known? How had she let this slip through her fingers? The weight of it all sank in as the man looked at her one final time before leaving the room. Everything was about to change, and it was all because of one small mistake that Miranda had no idea would set the world on fire. The web of influence. Miranda sat in the sterile, windowless room at the back of the terminal, her heart pounding in her chest. The walls seemed to close in on her as she replayed every detail of the flight. The way Maya had calmly handed over her boarding pass, the way she had moved to the back of the plane without a word of protest, and the unease that had settled in Miranda's stomach. She had never felt more isolated in her life. The weight of her mistake bore down on her, suffocating her with the stark realization that this wasn't just about a miscommunication. The mistake she had made was going to cost her everything. Miranda hadn't anticipated any of this. Sure, there were always complaints filed against flight attendants from time to time, mostly minor things, easy to resolve. But this was something different. She had heard of influential passengers, celebrities, business moguls, but she had never encountered one like Maya. From the moment she laid eyes on her, Miranda had sensed that there was more to this woman than met the eye. But she had failed to act on that instinct, dismissed it as paranoia. And now she was facing the consequences. Her thoughts raced as she sat, the hum of the airport terminal faintly filtering through the thick walls of the small room. The minutes felt like hours. Her mind kept circling back to Maya. What was she really capable of? How far did her influence extend? Miranda had no idea, but what she did know was that she was now in the midst of something far bigger than her job. This wasn't about a seating arrangement anymore. It was about power, control, and the consequences of underestimating someone who could change everything with a single word. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. 2 airport security officers entered, their faces unreadable, and without a word, they motioned for her to follow. The tension in the air was thick, and Miranda's feet felt like lead as she rose from the cold chair. She followed them through the terminal, past the gates and the bustling crowds of passengers, feeling like a fugitive, unsure of what awaited her. The officers led her down a narrow hallway, and Miranda's mind continued to spiral. How had she gotten here? What was she going to do? She didn't know what was happening, but she could feel the storm brewing. As they arrived at a door near the back of the airport, one of the officers knocked twice before turning the handle and motioning for Miranda to enter. Inside, a small group of people were gathered around a polished conference table. The room was sleek, modern, with dark wood paneling and minimalist decor that only added to the intimidating atmosphere. At the head of the table sat a man in a dark suit, his face set in a stern expression. He didn't need to introduce himself. Miranda already knew who he was. He was the man she had been warned about, the one whose influence could make or break careers. "Miranda Scott," he said, his voice sharp and authoritative. "You are being investigated for your actions on Flight 217 today." His words were like daggers, cutting through the silence in the room. "A complaint has been filed, and it's serious. Maya Carter has brought this matter to the highest levels of the airline. Do you understand?" The blood drained from Miranda's face as the name hit her once again. Maya Carter, the woman who had seemed so ordinary, so calm, yet had silently set this whole thing into motion. Miranda could barely breathe as the man continued, his words a blur of legal jargon and corporate speak. She didn't understand everything, but the message was clear. Maya wasn't just a passenger. She was a force with connections that reached into every corner of the airline and beyond. A force Miranda had foolishly underestimated. "Miss Carter is not just a regular customer," the man continued, his gaze never leaving Miranda's face. "She is a key stakeholder in this airport, a major shareholder. And this incident, this small mistake of yours, has escalated into something much bigger than you or I can control." The weight of his words hit Miranda like a physical blow. Maya was more than just a passenger. She was a person with power, with the ability to reshape the very infrastructure of the airline. And Miranda had crossed her. The realization hit her hard, and for the first time, she understood just how deep she was in. The man paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. Miranda could feel the sweat trickling down her back, the oppressive silence thick between them. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain herself, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? How could she explain what had happened? She had made a mistake, one that seemed so small in the moment, but had now unraveled everything. "You moved her without proper cause," the man said, his tone unwavering. "And now the board is involved. Do you know what that means?" Miranda shook her head, barely able to keep up with the pace of the conversation. She had never thought that one simple seating issue could lead to this. She had acted impulsively, moved Maya to another seat without fully verifying the details. It seemed so insignificant at the time. But now, it was clear that the repercussions were far more severe than anything she had ever imagined. "Miss Carter has made it clear that she's not interested in a simple apology," the man continued. "She doesn't need one. What she wants is change. She wants accountability. And she wants to see action taken to prevent something like this from happening again." Miranda's heart raced. Accountability. She knew she had made a mistake, but could she truly be held responsible for everything that was unfolding? She had followed protocol. She had done her job, or so she had thought. But Maya wasn't just any passenger. She was a stakeholder in the airport, a business mogul with influence far beyond the walls of this terminal. Miranda was caught in a web of power that she hadn't even known existed. The man leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Do you understand what I'm saying? This isn't just about customer service anymore. This is about the reputation of the entire airline. The board is already discussing what to do with you, and Miss Carter is watching. We need your full cooperation." Miranda's mind spun as she tried to process everything. How had she gotten herself into this situation? She had no idea that one wrong move, one poorly executed decision, could lead to this much chaos. The airline was facing a crisis, and she was at the center of it. She nodded slowly, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She was in trouble, serious trouble. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but she knew that everything she had worked for was now on the line. The investigation wasn't just about her job. It was about her entire future, her career, her reputation, and the more she thought about it, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a corporate issue. This was personal. Maya had the power to make or break her, and Miranda had no idea how to fix it. As the meeting came to a close, Miranda was led out of the room by the security officers. She felt like a puppet, her every move controlled by forces far beyond her comprehension. She had no choice but to follow, to comply, but her mind was still reeling. What would happen next? How would this unfold? What would Maya do? The question swirled in her head as she was escorted through the terminal, her thoughts consumed by the realization that her life was no longer in her hands. The flight had been just another day at work, until it wasn't. Now, Miranda was facing a storm she couldn't control, a storm set in motion by the quiet, composed woman who had crossed her path that day. Maya Carter wasn't just another passenger. She was the embodiment of power, and Miranda was about to learn just how far that power could reach. As the officers led her out of the building, Miranda felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Whatever happened next, her life would never be the same. The unseen forces. The cold air of the terminal rushed past Miranda as she was escorted by the two airport security officers. Her legs felt like lead, her body numb with disbelief. The world around her was a blur of sounds and movement, yet all she could hear in her mind was the conversation with the senior airport official, the gravity of the situation pressing in on her. Maya Carter, the name that had once seemed so ordinary, now loomed larger in Miranda's mind than anything else. Maya wasn't just a passenger. She was a powerhouse, a woman whose influence could shake entire industries, and Miranda had unwittingly crossed her. She couldn't fathom how one mistake, one simple, routine decision, had spiraled into a crisis that threatened to destroy everything she had worked for. The weight of the last few hours felt suffocating, and her stomach churned with anxiety, fear, and regret. As they walked through the airport, Miranda's mind raced. How had she not seen it? How had she failed to recognize that Maya was more than just an ordinary businesswoman? What had made her move so confidently, so assuredly, in shifting a first-class passenger to a cramped seat in the back? It was only now, in the aftermath, that Miranda was beginning to grasp just how deep the web of power and influence surrounding Maya truly was. The officers led her to an elevator, which carried them down into the depths of the terminal. She had no idea where they were going, but the thought of the unknown made her feel even more small and powerless. As the elevator doors opened, they emerged into a dimly lit corridor lined with locked doors and official-looking signage. The air here was thick with formality, the kind of place where real decisions were made, the kind that had the power to affect lives. They stopped in front of one of the doors, and the officer knocked once before entering. Miranda was directed to take a seat in the waiting area, and she complied, though her legs were trembling. The room was sterile, almost clinical in its coldness, with no windows and only the faint hum of fluorescent lighting overhead. She sat down, her hands clenched in her lap, trying to steady her breathing, but the words of the senior official echoed in her ears. "Miss Carter has already contacted the board. This matter has been escalated." Her mind raced with questions. What would Maya want from her? Was this about revenge? Was she going to lose her job, her career, her entire future because of this one simple decision? As she waited in the sterile room, time seemed to slow down. The hours bowled together as she sat in silence, a single thought consuming her. She had been foolish. So foolish. She had assumed that Maya was just another passenger, another face in the crowd, not realizing that she had stepped into a realm of power and influence that she had no understanding of. What was she up against? She wasn't entirely sure, but one thing was becoming painfully clear. Maya was not just a businesswoman. She was an investor, a key player in the aviation industry. Her influence wasn't limited to the airport or the airline where Miranda worked. It reached far beyond, threading its way through corporate boardrooms, political backchannels, and influential media. Miranda was a small piece of a much larger puzzle, one she hadn't even known existed. Miranda's phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her dark train of thought. She pulled it out quickly, hoping for some sign of relief, but as she unlocked the screen, she saw it was a message from Dennis, the senior flight attendant who had been working with her on the flight. "Miranda, are you okay? People are talking. The whole crew knows about the complaint. They're saying Maya's got a lot of power in this industry. You need to be careful. This isn't just about you and her anymore. I'm worried about you." Miranda stared at the message, her hands trembling as she read it. The unsettling realization that everyone else had already heard about her mistake, that the gossip had spread so quickly, hit her like a slap in the face. There was no going back now. She was a part of something much larger, something beyond her control. Before she could respond to Dennis, the door to the room opened, and two men stepped inside. Both were dressed in dark suits, their expressions unreadable. One of them was older, his face lined with age and experience, while the other was younger, sharp-eyed and focused. Both men exuded a quiet authority, the kind that Miranda had learned to recognize over the years, but had never truly understood, until now. "Miss Scott," the older man said, his voice gravelly but calm, "we need to discuss your actions today, and what happens next." Miranda felt a cold wave wash over her. She stood, her hands still shaking, and met their gaze with a mixture of dread and confusion. I understand," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. What could she say? She had made a mistake. She had acted without thinking, and now it seemed as if she was paying the price for that. The younger man gestured for her to sit again, and she complied, her heart racing. The two men took their places across from her at the table, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, until the older man finally broke it. "We have reviewed the details of the complaint," he began, "and we are aware of the events that transpired on Flight 217. However, what you need to understand, Miss Scott, is that this is no longer just an isolated incident. This is something much larger." Miranda's head spun. What did he mean by that? Had she not just moved a passenger to another seat? What was so catastrophic about that? "Miss Carter's complaint," the older man continued, "has already been brought to the highest levels of our organization. We've spoken with the board, and they are aware of the situation. The repercussions are already in motion. But it's not just about the airline's reputation now. It's about the trust that's been broken." "Trust," Miranda echoed, struggling to keep her voice steady. She didn't understand. How could she have broken trust with someone she had just met, with someone who had been so calm, so controlled? The younger man, who had been silent up until now, spoke for the first time. His voice was cold, calculated. "You moved a first-class passenger without cause. That's a violation of procedure. But more than that, it's a violation of respect. Respect for the position that Miss Carter holds, not just in this airport, but in this industry. You didn't see her for who she was. You assumed that because she didn't cause a scene, she was just another businesswoman. And that assumption has cost you." The words hit Miranda like a physical blow. She had assumed, and in doing so, had overlooked everything about Maya's presence. What had seemed like a simple error in judgment now felt like a life-altering mistake. She had disrespected someone who was far more powerful than she had ever imagined, and that mistake had now turned into something much bigger than a seating issue. "We need to understand," the older man said, his tone softer now, though still firm, "how this happened. How did you not recognize who she was? Why didn't you verify her booking more thoroughly?" Miranda struggled to find the words. Her mind felt foggy, as if the world around her were spinning faster than she could keep up. She had simply seen a first-class ticket and assumed that the seat reassignment was harmless. She hadn't questioned it. She hadn't questioned anything. "I didn't think it was a big deal," Miranda finally muttered, her voice breaking. "I didn't realize." The younger man cut her off, leaning forward, his gaze intense. "That's the problem, Miss Scott. You didn't realize. You didn't realize who you were dealing with. And now we're all paying the price. The words hung heavy in the air, settling over Miranda like a weight. She had acted rashly, blindly. And now, as the men exchanged a look, Miranda could tell that they were no longer concerned with her simple mistake. They were concerned with something much larger. They were concerned with the ripple effect of her actions, and the fact that Maya Carter wasn't just a powerful woman. She was a force, a presence that could shift the course of the entire airline if she wanted to. The older man cleared his throat, his eyes narrowing. "Miss Scott, what you need to understand is that this situation goes beyond personal error. This is about the culture of the airline. It's about how we treat every passenger, regardless of their background, their wealth, or their status. You failed to respect that. And now, Miss Carter has made it clear that she's watching. She's waiting for us to show that we are taking this seriously." The younger man folded his arms, his expression unmoving. "You'll be receiving a formal suspension while we conduct a full investigation. Your future with the airline is uncertain, Miss Scott. But understand this, Miss Carter has already made her expectations clear. She wants more than just an apology." Miranda's stomach dropped at the words. She had expected to be reprimanded. But this felt different. This wasn't just about her career. This was about the future of the airline, about the way Maya Carter could reshape everything with the pull of a string. As the men stood to leave, the younger man shot her one last, lingering look. "You have time to think, Miss Scott. But understand that Miss Carter won't forget this. We don't know what she's planning. But it's clear she has more power than you could have ever imagined. And she's watching." Miranda sat there, her head spinning, her thoughts racing. She wasn't sure what to do, where to go from here. She had stepped into a world she hadn't understood, and now she was trapped in a web she couldn't escape. Maya had already begun to make her move, and Miranda had no idea how far that power would stretch, or how long it would take before the consequences of her actions consumed everything she had worked for. The only thing she knew for certain now was that her life had changed forever, and it was only just beginning. The unraveling. Miranda sat alone in her apartment, staring out the window at the city below. The sky was painted in deep shades of purple and orange as the evening descended, but the beauty of the sunset did little to soothe her frayed nerves. The events of the last few days had left her in a state of constant anxiety, and each moment that passed felt like an eternity. She had been suspended from her job, the investigation looming over her like a storm cloud. The realization that Maya Carter's influence was the driving force behind everything happening in her life made her stomach turn. Miranda had always prided herself on her ability to handle stressful situations. As a flight attendant, she had navigated difficult passengers, turbulent flights, and long hours without ever letting it get to her. But this was different. She wasn't just facing an angry customer or an inconvenient schedule change. She was caught in a web of power, and no amount of experience had prepared her for this. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping Miranda from her thoughts. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up. The message was from Dennis again, her colleague who had been with her during the flight. "Miranda, I heard they've escalated it even further. People are talking about the board being involved. You know that Maya's connected to the higher-ups. I'm worried this might be bigger than just a suspension." Miranda read the message twice, trying to process what it meant. Maya's power, her reach, it was more than just a stake in the airport or the airline. It was an empire built on influence, and Miranda had become a pawn in that game. Dennis's words echoed in her mind. This might be bigger than just a suspension. What did that mean? Was she about to lose her job for good? Would she ever be able to recover from this mistake? Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from the airline's HR department. The subject line made Miranda's stomach drop. Urgent, scheduled meeting regarding your suspension. She stared at the screen, the words swimming before her eyes. She wasn't ready for another meeting, not with everything that had already happened. The dread she felt was palpable, suffocating her with each passing second. How could this be happening? She had always done her job to the best of her ability. She had worked hard, earned her place in the industry, and now, in an instant, it was all slipping away. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning at 9 a.m. Miranda knew she had no choice but to attend. As the hours passed, the weight of the situation seemed to press down on her chest more and more. She could no longer pretend that this was just a misunderstanding or a small mistake. She had underestimated Maya, and now it seemed like the consequences were only beginning to unfold. The next morning, Miranda arrived at the airline's headquarters, her stomach in knots. She barely noticed the hustle and bustle of the airport around her as she made her way to the HR department. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, and every glance from passing colleagues felt like a judgment. The whispers had already started. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked, could hear the faint murmur of voices in the distance. They knew. They all knew. When she entered the HR office, the atmosphere was tense, suffocating. Two executives were seated at the long conference table, their expressions unreadable. Neither of them greeted her. Instead, they simply motioned for her to sit. The cold, clinical nature of the room only heightened the weight of the moment. She felt small in the chair, her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap. The older executive, the same one who had spoken to her in the sterile room a few days earlier, leaned forward. "Miranda, we need to discuss the fallout from your actions. The board has been informed, and Miss Carter's complaint has reached the highest levels of the organization. As you know, she holds significant influence here, and her concerns are being taken very seriously." Miranda nodded, her throat tight. She didn't need any more reminders of Maya's power. It was clear now that this wasn't about a simple seat mix-up. Maya's complaint had reached places Miranda couldn't even comprehend. What started as a routine task had turned into an industry-wide scandal. And now, Miranda was the one left to pick up the pieces. "We've been reviewing the situation," the older executive continued, "and while your actions were in violation of protocol, there's more at play here than just an isolated incident. This has exposed deeper issues within the airline, issues we can no longer afford to ignore. We have to ask, how did you miss the fact that Miss Carter was not just another passenger? Why did you not recognize her importance when you interacted with her?" Miranda's chest tightened. She had no answers for them. Not really. All she could do was sit there, her mind racing. How had she missed it? How had she failed to see the power dynamics at play? It wasn't just a mistake with a seat assignment. It was a mistake with a person whose influence could change the course of the airline's future. And now, she was caught in the crossfire. "I didn't know," Miranda said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea who she was. I thought it was a routine seating issue. I didn't realize what I was doing." The younger executive, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "That's the problem, Miss Scott. You didn't realize, and in doing so, you've jeopardized not just your career, but the airline's reputation. The fallout from this incident has already begun to ripple through the company. People are talking. Changes are being made, and you need to understand that." Miranda's hands clenched into fists as she tried to hold back the tears. She had always believed that her dedication to her work would shield her from something like this. She had followed the rules, worked hard to make sure passengers were comfortable and safe. But in one moment of misjudgment, she had ruined everything. "You'll be given time to reflect on your actions," the older executive said, his tone softened slightly. "But we need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Miss Carter isn't just a high-ranking customer. She's someone who can shape the future of this airline, and she's watching closely. Your future here depends on how you handle this moving forward." Miranda's heart sank. She had been given a lifeline, but it was fragile. If she didn't handle this carefully, if she didn't prove that she could learn from her mistakes, her career would be over. The next few days, weeks, months, they would determine her future. But as she sat there, surrounded by these cold, calculating figures, it felt impossible to hold on to hope. The meeting ended with no clear resolution. Miranda was told she would receive further instructions once the investigation was complete. For now, her suspension remained in effect. She stood slowly, her legs shaky, as she walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind her, and she was once again left in the silence of uncertainty. As she walked through the hallway, Miranda felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. Her colleagues passed by, casting furtive glances in her direction. She could feel their eyes on her, their judgment hanging in the air like an invisible fog. She had always been a respected member of the team, someone who could be relied upon. But now, it seemed that respect had vanished. She had become the person everyone whispered about, the person who had made the fatal mistake. Back at home, Miranda collapsed onto the couch, her mind racing. She had no idea what to do next. She had made a mistake, but was it too late to fix it? Could she truly redeem herself, or had Maya's power already sealed her fate? As the night dragged on, Miranda found herself scrolling through her phone, searching for any sign of a way out. She checked her messages, her email, even the news, hoping for some distraction from the crushing weight of her reality. But nothing provided relief. The only thing that kept echoing in her mind was the meeting with the executives, their cold, detached demeanor, and the certainty in their voices. She was caught in a storm she couldn't escape, one set in motion by the calm and controlled Maya Carter. And as much as Miranda wished she could go back and undo her mistake, she knew that wasn't possible. She could only move forward, hoping that somewhere along the way, she would find a way to redeem herself. But the clock was ticking. Every moment that passed, the stakes grew higher. Maya's influence was real, and Miranda was learning the hard way that one small mistake could unravel everything. The choice. The days that followed the meeting in HR felt like a slow descent into an unknown abyss. Miranda tried to go through the motions of her life, but everything felt different. Her apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt foreign, like a cage she couldn't escape. The buzzing of her phone, the constant influx of emails and messages, only added to the chaos in her mind. Every time she looked at her phone, she saw the name Maya Carter looming in her notifications, a reminder of her mistake, her failure. Miranda had always been someone who could compartmentalize. She had trained herself to push through difficult situations and keep going, no matter the obstacles in her path. But this was different. The weight of what she had done, the sheer enormity of the consequences, was crushing her. She had been foolish, unthinking. One wrong move, and her career, the life she had built for herself, was now in jeopardy. Her thoughts kept returning to the same question. What could she do to fix this? Maya Carter, the woman who had silently dismantled Miranda's entire world, had become an enigma in her mind. What did Maya want? Was it revenge? Was she going to use her power to crush Miranda's career for good? The lack of clarity around Maya's intentions gnawed at Miranda's nerves. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about the profound sense of being completely out of control, of being at the mercy of a woman she had barely known. But in the midst of her spiraling anxiety, a new message arrived. This time, it was from Clara, a fellow flight attendant, and one of the few people who hadn't turned their back on her. "Hey, Miranda, I heard from some of the crew. The board's holding a meeting tomorrow. I think they're discussing next steps for you. Whatever happens, I just wanted to remind you, don't give up. You've worked hard for this. You can make it through this." Miranda stared at the screen, the words barely registering as her mind drifted elsewhere. Clara's support felt like a lifeline, but the reality of her situation was too overwhelming. Clara didn't know what it felt like to be trapped in the web of someone like Maya. The executives had made it clear. Maya wasn't just a powerful passenger. She was a stakeholder, someone whose reach extended far beyond the walls of the airline. And Miranda had foolishly stepped into a battle she wasn't equipped to fight. But Clara's words also sparked something deep within Miranda. She had to stop wallowing in her guilt. She had to stop feeling sorry for herself and start thinking about how she was going to face what was coming. There had to be a way to fix this. The next morning, Miranda stood in front of her mirror, staring at her reflection as if seeing herself for the first time. Her face was pale, her eyes tired and hollow, but something in the depths of her gaze began to shift. For the first time since this ordeal had begun, she felt a faint flicker of determination. The decision she was about to make would determine everything: the future of her career, her dignity, and whether or not she could reclaim the life she had worked so hard to build. With a deep breath, she walked out of the apartment and into the unknown. As she arrived at the airport, Miranda's pulse quickened. The air felt heavy with tension, as if everyone could sense that something big was about to happen. She made her way to the HR department, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. But the closer she got to the conference room, the more the uncertainty built up. What were they going to say? What would the next few minutes hold? When she entered the room, the same two executives were waiting for her. But this time, there was something different in the air. Maya Carter was there too. Miranda hadn't expected to see her in person again so soon, but here she was, sitting at the far end of the room, her presence as commanding as ever. Maya wasn't just a shadow lurking behind the scenes. She was now directly involved in Miranda's fate. The realization hit Miranda with the force of a punch. The older executive cleared his throat as Miranda entered. "Miss Scott, please take a seat. We're about to begin." Miranda complied, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the world had shifted beneath her feet. Maya's eyes were fixed on her, not with anger, but with that same unyielding calmness. For a moment, Miranda was paralyzed by the weight of it all. She had never felt so small, so exposed. But she couldn't afford to show weakness now. She had to face this head-on. The younger executive began, his voice steady but firm. "We've reviewed the situation thoroughly, Miranda. We've taken into account the full scope of the incident, the complaints, and Miss Carter's concerns. The decision we make today will determine the next steps for you and your future with the airline." Miranda's heart hammered in her chest. She had been suspended, placed on leave, and now she was facing the highest levels of scrutiny she had ever encountered. The airline's reputation, her career, everything was on the line. "The question we have for you today," the older executive continued, his gaze unblinking, "is what you're willing to do to make this right. We understand that mistakes happen, but the gravity of this situation requires more than just a simple apology. We need to know if you're willing to take responsibility for your actions and prove that you can learn from this. If you do, there may still be a way forward for you. But if not..." Miranda's mind raced. She couldn't afford to let this slip away. She knew that if she didn't show that she was truly committed to making amends, she would lose everything. She would be just another cautionary tale, another employee who had been consumed by their own mistakes. But there was a part of her that wanted more than just the bare minimum. She wanted to rebuild herself, to prove to herself and everyone else that she could rise above this. Maya's voice cut through the tension, smooth and cold. "I've been made aware of your actions, Miss Scott, and while I don't expect any excuses from you, I also understand that we live in a world where mistakes can be an opportunity for growth. That's what I'm interested in, growth. Not just from you, but from the airline itself." Miranda's throat tightened. Maya wasn't here for revenge, not directly, but she was setting the tone. This wasn't about forgiveness. It was about transformation. She realized, in that moment, that Maya wasn't going to allow her to just brush this off. Maya had an agenda, and it wasn't one driven by bitterness. It was driven by something far more powerful, an opportunity to shape an industry. The younger executive spoke again, his voice like steel. "We've already begun implementing changes in response to the situation. But your role in this will also be part of those changes. We're offering you the chance to undergo extensive sensitivity and cultural awareness training, conflict resolution, and leadership development. If you take this opportunity, and if you prove that you're capable of more, we'll consider reintegrating you into the company." Miranda's heart was racing. The room seemed to close in on her, the decision too big to comprehend all at once. She could feel her pulse in her ears, her thoughts scattered. She wanted to say something, anything, to express her gratitude or her disbelief, but no words came. Maya, who had once seemed so untouchable, now seemed like the key to everything. "You must understand," the older executive continued, "this is a pivotal moment. Your willingness to take accountability will determine your future. You'll need to prove that you can not only change, but that you can contribute to the culture of the company in a meaningful way. The board has already agreed that this is the best course of action, but it's up to you whether you take it." Miranda nodded, that the weight of the decision nearly overwhelmed her. Could she really change? She had always been proud of her career, proud of the way she had conducted herself in her work. But now, as she sat there, she realized that the person who had made that mistake wasn't the person she wanted to be anymore. "Is this a one-time opportunity?" Miranda finally asked, her voice steady, but edged with vulnerability. "Or is this my last chance?" Maya's eyes flickered as she responded, her voice calm but filled with an undercurrent of authority. "You're being given a chance to prove your worth, Miranda. But understand this, if you fail to grasp this opportunity, it won't be just your job on the line. It will be the entire company's integrity." The room fell silent, and for the first time, Miranda understood. She wasn't just fixing her career. She was fixing a broken system, one that had allowed her to make the mistake in the first place. The decision she faced was more than about her. It was about standing up for what was right, about changing how she viewed the world around her. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her like a mantle. "I accept," Miranda said, her voice steady. "I'll take the training. I'll prove I can change. I won't let this mistake define me." The executives nodded, and for the first time in days, Miranda felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something she had to fight for. And even if the road ahead was hard, she knew she had to take the first step.